Live. I was going to start with a joke, but I guess I'll save it for my afternoon show. James Comey pleaded not guilty earlier today to his charges. Gentlemen, this is an off-hour, off-time live stream. Alex, you want to tell the world who you are? The other Alex is coming as well, right?
He is
right there.
indeed, absolutely.
He's
We're
in the
just waiting
background.
for him. But I'm from the Duran. I'm one of the two people who make up the Duran. We are a channel that you can find on Rumble, on Locals, on YouTube, on all sorts of places. We basically do international affairs and geopolitical commentary. And we are absolutely delighted to be here through your generosity on this show. And we're very much looking forward to the show. And there is Alex. He's just joined us.
I'm going to bring up your channel. You've been on a few times now, and
Yeah.
look, you guys are loved and respected for a reason. And for those who don't know, you have a Rumble channel?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll bring that one up after. You know what? I'll bring that one right now. Alex, how goes the battle?
Doing great. Thank you for inviting us to the show. Once again, it's a pleasure and an honor. And we also have a locals, the Duran.locals.com.
Duran. I'm going to bring all these up right now to show everybody. Locals. I guess the question on everybody's mind is how much longer do we have to live on this beautiful earth? Sorry, I'll start with a joke. Robert, how are you doing?
Good. We are going to survey the world. We try to do this as often as we can, quarterly or so with the Duran. You can follow Alexander McCourse and Alex Christoforou, or both the constituent members of the Duran and the Duran itself, on a wide range of channels. The Duran.locals.com, very vibrant locals community, a lot of input and information provided there. In fact, Alexander McCourse does his weekly live stream later today there at the Duran.locals.com. So if you have follow-up questions, you can go there and watch as well and ask. Also, of course, on YouTube and Rumble and Rockfin and Odyssey, all of those places. Also on X, the Duran Real or Duran Real. I just think Real because I'm stuck too much soccer from Spain these days. The Alexander McCourse comes from a family you could call like the George Washingtons of Greece. Long history of being deeply involved in European affairs. And Alex Christoforou's family from Cyprus goes way back, in extensive diplomatic roots across the world. So they come from that background, that experience, bring an independent mindset to issues of geopolitics, and their short-term and medium-term predictive accuracy, in my experience, is better than anybody else in the space. We will cover today all the different hotspots around the world. We'll cover Europe, we'll cover Asia, we'll cover Russia, we'll cover Latin America, and we'll cover the Middle East, which never ceases to be a hotspot. We live in very interesting times, though many people think that Chinese proverb is not always in a desirable state of affairs to be in. Maybe it was Lenin who said sometimes the world happens in decades, sometimes decades happen in months. And we're seeing that in live time. And we have a very unique president here in the United States of America that takes some unique approaches that being able to translate them or predict them has become an expertise of its own accord. So we'll be discussing all of those issues as we cover through with certain thematic unity presented. And one of the importance of these kind of shows, and one of the reasons why part of my daily diet is Alexander and the Duran, so much so that I find myself copying certain phrases that they use, just saying, and other things of that nature, is that we have this dynamic where strategic empathy is looked down upon. To employ empathy with those you may disagree with for the purposes of understanding them to strategically achieve your own objectives, not suicidal empathy, where you empathize so much with someone different than you that you destroy yourself. You empathize with them for the purpose of getting your own agenda in. And if you don't, you will more often fail. Both Alex and Alexander are deep studies of history, and often one of the biggest lessons from history is the importance of strategic empathy. There might be other useful lessons like don't invade Russia, and things of this nature. Don't go to war with Russia, and so forth. But we'll be exploring it within that framework. In the critical aspect of the accuracy of intel and information. that you look at the great debacles of world history, and you often find the failure to employ strategic empathy, the failure to understand the lessons of history, and as importantly, inaccurate intel. If you'd followed them, you'd be able to predict with a high degree of accuracy what is, for example, happening on the battlefields of Ukraine, much more than certain people in, I don't know, the Pentagon of the United States of America, who are busy spinning tales that even Baghdad Bob would have been ashamed to do back in his Iraq days. So we'll go through all of that as we cover the landscape. But I'll start with Alexander. What is at the top? What do you think is the greatest risks we face in the near short term over the next 3 months to a year from a geopolitical perspective?
I think the greatest risk is the situation in Europe and the fact that we're completely out of control here in Europe. I don't think people in the United States quite get a sense of how hysterical the atmosphere here in Europe has become, because there's a sense that the war in Ukraine is going wrong. I think that sense has been there for a while, but I think it's got much worse over the last couple of weeks and months. And there's also a sense that the United States is no longer fully on board with this ultimately European enterprise, which is the one that we launched ourselves into against the Russians in Ukraine. I mean, remember, it all started with an idea of establishing an association agreement between Europe, between the EU and Ukraine. And when there were some objections, both within Ukraine and from Russia to that, that escalated and went on escalating. And it has brought us to this war that we're in today. So I think there's this extraordinary atmosphere of anger and fear and hysteria, where drones that appear over airports are seen as proof of a Russian attack tomorrow, where the Danish Prime Minister talks about Europe being in a state of war, effectively, where the Polish Prime Minister talks in the same way, where there's talk about German rearmament. And it's very easy to see how this could all get completely out of control. And we could end up doing something very, very stupid and very, very bad, which we might not be able to contain. Now, of course, there are problems going on in other places in the Middle East, but I think it is the situation in Europe which is the most dangerous.
And Alex, you were mentioning recently on your show I keep trying to imitate. I don't like it, but I can't quite get there. I get part of it, but I just can't get the Alex's emphasis. But you mentioned that yesterday gold crossed 4,000, big threshold, and for a lot of people it was a green light for great success incoming. But as you noted, historically, that's not always what a sudden rise in gold means. It means if every central bank and a bunch of the world's economic elites are rushing to buy gold, it's usually an indicator, going all the way back to the decline and decay of the Roman Empire, that they think the world might be going to hell in a handbasket. And they want to make sure they've stockpiled that gold, and they don't trust any currency. And then we have digital gold, Bitcoin, also going to record highs. So there's plenty of our followers that buy gold and bought a lot of Bitcoin over the years. A lot of you guys followers have done very, very well if they took that necessary risk and caution. But can you explain to people that this sudden rise in gold suggests a sign that the world's elites, the people in the best position to know what might be coming down the pipeline, are very nervous and scared about what might be coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, they're nervous, and they're putting their money into gold. Some of them are buying Bitcoin, real estate. I see a lot of the elites buying real estate. Me being in Cyprus, I do see it. So they're.
Alex just froze.
Yeah,
I hadn't seen that gold crossed 4,000.
They're looking to put their money in 1,000. Yeah.
Sorry, you froze up there for a second.
Yeah, you guys hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, yeah, all-time high. Bitcoin as well. Both of them yesterday hit all-time highs.
My question is, like, if the world goes to hell in a handbasket, what good is an ounce of gold in your hand going to do? Like, you still have, you're going to shave off little pieces to buy food, but there's going to be no food to buy.
They'll put it in their bunkers.
Yeah.
they'll stack it up in their bunkers.
So here's the question: like, it's almost like in America, or say the West, we've stopped talking about the war in Ukraine to some extent, in that it's going on and it's sort of no longer in the news cycle. In Europe, I mean, you're still living with that war, ongoing war, day in and day out. What is the sentiment like in the non-Ukrainian part of Europe?
Well, this is exactly a good point, because I think in the United States, people are thinking about the war less. In Europe, they're thinking about this more and more all the time, and this is partly driving the fear and the anger. We had the summit meeting of European leaders a few days ago in Copenhagen, and I have to say the rhetoric was just off the scale. It was completely out of control. Now, I think what has happened, and I will jump ahead a bit, maybe a discussion we're going to have in more detail later. But I think what happened was that sometime in the early summer, the Ukrainians themselves began to understand that they're not going to win the war. And in fact, they're likely to lose it. I think it has taken a little longer for this understanding to reach governments in the West, but in Western Europe. But I think over the last couple of weeks, it's hit home. I think there's an understanding that the Russians are indeed grinding relentlessly forward. They might not be moving very fast, but they are always moving. And there isn't very much that can be done. In fact, there isn't anything that can be done to stop them. And that all diplomacy, all attempts to persuade them to stop have failed. And I think this has created a tremendous sense of crisis across Europe, because people sense here that the United States is becoming more detached from this conflict and this war, even as it is increasingly looking like we are going to be facing a major military defeat in Europe. And it is a defeat in Europe. I think it was Donald Tusk or Radek Sikorski, one of these two, the Polish prime minister or the Polish foreign minister, who actually said it straightforwardly. A defeat for Ukraine is a defeat for Europe. And that will, of course, affect radically Europe's own sense of itself and of its own importance and of its place in the world and of its future security. So I think this is probably what has happened. As I said, I think they've understood that they're losing the war and they don't know what to do.
In that regard, Alex, you've been discussing the risks, and I mean, there can be rewards, but President Trump seems to be the great virtue of President Trump, and the occasional vice of President Trump is his ability to turn on a dime, and his ability, but it reflects a complete lack of ideological commitment to anything. In other words, the good thing is he's not ideologically locked into the neocon, neoliberal world order. He has no ideological commitment to it. On the flip side, it's not clear what he does have an ideological commitment to. So we thought it might be opposition to war, but that has been sporadic and erratic. And Trump seems to be a big believer. Nixon was similar back in the day, though Trump employs it at a whole different level, in the madman theory of global governance, which is that you can get what you want by everybody at the poker table not having any idea what it is you actually want. That, you know, the bluff, heavy obsession that Trump seems to have, especially in his second administration, has major risk when you're bluffing with nuclear war as the risk. We've seen with you guys have both identified that General Kellogg and other people within the Joint Chiefs of Staff continue to give false intel and information to President Trump. And that even though, and I'll be citing some information throughout this report from a national intelligence report, where we're talking about Venezuela not running a huge drug cartel, whether we're talking about Iran not building nukes imminently, whether we're talking about Russia being anything but a paper tiger militarily, and Ukraine doing, as Alexander just mentioned, doing anything except winning on the battlefield with any real prospect of winning. But we see people from the administration, Vice President Vance recently, repeating some of these General Kellogg lines, that Russia is falling apart. It's losing massive numbers of casualties. Its economy is about to frazzle. And if you just push them a little bit harder, Mr. President, then by golly, you'll get everything you want without anybody being unhappy. But some of the intelligence I'll be referencing here ain't Ruski intelligence. It's U.S. intelligence. And it's not U.S. intelligence from 2 years ago. It's U.S. intelligence from 6 months ago. It's the National Intelligence Report of Odianai Tulsi Gabbard, who said Russia's military is very strong and is doing well on the battlefield. It was Gabbard's report that said Iran was not imminently creating nukes. It was Gabbard's report that Venezuela is not this huge drug cartel that's responsible for most drugs coming into the country. These are fig leaves for continuing war or other risky policies. But as you've watched this through, what's your thoughts on the internal dynamic of the U.S. in terms of, do you believe President Trump is getting accurate intel and information about the Ukrainian conflict, about what is happening in Venezuela, about what is happening in Iran? And in general, what are some of the risks of a madman theory? In other words, how much right now we see the peace possibility in Gaza, but Hamas doesn't have any confidence or trust that Israel or the U.S. will keep up their end of the deal. And that's currently what's holding up, it appears, that peace negotiation in Gaza with Hamas and Israel. What are some of the downsides to the world not knowing, to bluffing all the time, to this being so unpredictable that you actually could trigger a conflict rather than escape one?
Yeah, I think Trump was at a time early in his administration, he was getting information from the Kellogg side of things, say the Kellogg, Lindsey Graham side of things, and he was getting information from, let's say, the Witkoff Vance side of things. But it seems to me that he is now drifting more towards the Kellogg, Lindsey Graham side of things. There are reports which claim that Witkoff is going to be leaving the administration by the end of the year. That's troubling, in my opinion. And it does seem like Trump is moving towards the Kellogg, Lindsey Graham side of things when it comes specifically to Ukraine. That's the way it seems. But with Trump, you never know. Like you said, Robert, he could change his mind tomorrow and keep everyone guessing. I think the problem with the Europeans is that Trump not being able to just tell them, we're out of this thing, we're gone, keeps the Europeans kind of freaked out. So they're thinking to themselves, we need to continue to escalate. We need to continue to keep on trying to contact Trump, to whisper in his ear how it's important to go to war with Russia, how it's important to support Ukraine. And he gives them a type of false hope in that maybe if they just liaise with Trump a little more, if Stubb just played another round of golf with Trump, the president of Finland, then we can get Trump to finally support us 100%. And so they keep his position keeps the Europeans kind of dangling. And if he would just cut the whole Ukraine thing off, then yeah, the Europeans would be panicking for a couple of days. They'd be pissed off at Trump. They're pissed off at Trump anyway. They don't like Trump anyway, but they would be doubly pissed off at Trump. Mm. But eventually, after a week or so, they would say it's over. We don't have the United States, it's over. But now they're kind of in a no man's land, and they're thinking, if we continue to court Trump, if we fly over to D.C., make another trip, continue to talk to him, kiss his butt a little bit more, then we're going to finally get him to commit to us 100%. And Trump is playing them off. He's keeping them hanging. He is keeping them on the line. I think it's a dangerous approach. He needs to just, in my opinion, he needs to just cut this thing off for the United States' benefit and for the Europeans' benefit. Yeah. And for Ukraine's benefit at the end of the day, I mean, when all is said and done, it benefits Ukraine.
Well, the Ukrainian people want peace. What's Ukrainian fascinating to transition to Alexander, we see the people Trump keeps hanging out with promoting this war are all losers. Trump hates to be around losers. The Zelensky curse is called that for a reason. As in your home country, it looks like Starmer's days are clearly numbered. Now the most hated leader in the history of Britain, in modern history of Britain. Merz is approaching the most hated leader in the history of Germany, which is impressive for a country that had Mustache Man running their country. You've got the At the same time, you with the AFD's rise there, populist rise in Germany, the populist Reform Party of Nigel Farage might obliterate what's left of the Tories and completely crush Labour. Zelensky himself is deeply underwater. That's why he won't do That's why he won't do elections, and is busy baiting the Ukrainian Orthodox Church now, apparently, and everything else along with it. But but one of the places you followed where we're seeing the complete collapse in live time is the little Napoleon wannabe, Macron, is the French government, the third one he's tried to set up in short order, collapsing. The real downside risk to Trump's madman strategy, following up on Alex's point, but also what the heck is happening in France, and can Macron really hold on for another year, or at this point will he have to call elections?
Indeed. Can I just say a few things? First of all, playing a game of bluff, following the game of being the madman, but bluffing, which is ultimately what the madman theory is all about. The problem is that other people that you might be dealing with don't play that kind of game. I mean, poker is an American game. The Russians don't play poker. I mean, just to say, their dominant national game, as many people have pointed out, is chess. And one of the problems with this particular approach is that it's not just keeping the Europeans dangling, it is keeping the Russians dangling too. And the Ukrainians also, by the way. It's giving the Ukrainians false hopes. It's giving the Russians also uncertainty as to what exactly it is that the United States is really doing and where this whole thing with the United States is going. And there are people in Moscow who are now increasingly saying, well, look, the president of the United States says one thing, the president of the United States the next day says something completely different. One day he talks about improving relations with us. The next day, he seems to be attracted to this very bad idea that the Europeans and the Ukrainians have cooked up, which is to get the US to supply Ukraine with Tomahawks. The Europeans, the Ukrainians, and I'm sure Kellogg and people like that too. And well, you're starting to see increasing signs in Moscow that people there are now starting to push back, and they're telling Putin, well, enough's enough. We've gone as far as we can with this. This isn't going to lead us anywhere in the end. And over the last 24 hours, two things in Russia have happened, which are worrying. The first is the Russian parliament had a session, and it was addressed by a man called Ryabkov, who is Russia's deputy foreign minister, a very, very senior man, and who is undoubtedly speaking with the authority of the Russian government. And he said that the momentum of the Alaska summit has stalled, that the situation between us and the Americans is deteriorating, that prospects for peace have been stillborn. And it is no coincidence, as the Russians like to say, that Putin almost simultaneously with that event in the Russian parliament had a televised meeting with his generals in which they discussed the military situation and the generals' plans to win the war. And there was no talk about negotiations with the United States, no mention of Trump, no talk about diplomacy or of the pursuit of peace. So it's almost as if the Russians are saying, we can't carry on with this anymore. We've got to focus on the war and we've got to win. So that's the risk with this strategy. It pushes your negotiating partner away. And Putin, for the first time that I can remember, is being publicly challenged in Russia about the fact that he's been having these meetings with Trump and has been outreaching to him. And when I say criticized, he's not been criticized by the usual people on social media or the Telegram channels or wherever. I mean, actual Russian officials are basically, through very elliptical language, but they're now starting to say, well, the boss on this has spent too much time And now we need to start taking off the gloves and focusing on the war and forgetting about a rapprochement with the United States. I say all of this. I really don't want this at all. I want a rapprochement between, or at least a détente between Russia and the United States. But this is the danger with this game of bluff that Trump has been playing.
A question though that I have, I'm wondering, what does a Russian victory look like at this point? What does a Ukrainian loss look like at this point? From the perspective of Europe, are they afraid that a Ukrainian loss will mean that Russia occupies Kyiv, or that they're just going to keep the land that they've got in the east and the port place? And now I forgot the name. And Crimea. Is the concern that all of Ukraine is going to fall if Russia wins the war? Put it in quotes.
Right. Well, I think this is the other thing that's important, is that the Russians have to some extent been drawing the curtain a little on what they envisage as a victory, an actual military victory, what that would mean. And that is that they've now confirmed in various places that their military is actually working to a plan in Ukraine. In other words, they're not improvising. It's not opportunistic. They have an actual military plan, an actual plan that they've been following. And there's been an article by a very, very well connected Russian journalist, which seems to relate to a map that the Russian military showed in a program that was done a few weeks ago. And it showed all of Donbass, Zaporozhye, east of the Dnieper under Russian control, but also the entirety of Ukraine's Black Sea coast, Odessa, Nikolaev, under Russian control also. So it looks as if the military have been tasked or have tasked themselves with achieving that objective. Nobody expects it to happen tomorrow or in a week's time or a month's time. We are still looking at an incremental advance. But that does appear to be their objective now. The fact that this map was shown in the way that it was, the fact that these articles are starting to appear, gives us an idea of what ultimate Russian military objectives are. Putin is prepared to accept a lot less than this, but some people in Russia clearly want to push further. And to be quite clear about this, if Ukraine loses both control of the Dnieper River in its central areas and its Black Sea coast, then it is no longer viable as a state of the sort that we have known. Economically, it cannot function because it loses its hinterland and its access to the sea.
It becomes a landlocked, whatever's left of its natural resources.
It becomes a landlocked country which is deprived of its industrial resources, its industrial centers, and the places where most of its strategic minerals are located.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, Alex, in the risks of this bluff strategy, maybe I'll go to nuclear war, maybe I won't. Just in general, if you say that out loud, you kind of recognize the risks of it. But one of them lately is all this tomahawk nonsense. So as soon as it was General Kellogg, this is the game changer of game changers. Never trust a general named after a kid cereal. Just say. But the Responsible Statecraft publication of the Quincy Institute, named after my great cousin John Quincy Adams, who Alexander McCourse recently did one of his many beautiful quotes over the years. He, of course, was the one who penned the phrase, "We Americans do not go abroad searching for monsters to destroy," and we spent the better part of the last century searching for and pretending we're looking at monsters to destroy in the military-industrial complex. But you look at, as soon as the Responsible Statecraft laid it out, the Tomahawk is designed to be a submarine weapon. It is not designed to be an on-the-ground weapon. And the very few platforms we have to use it on the ground, which have only been recently developed, are not going to Ukraine. So most people who looked at this from the military logistical side said this is nonsense. Now maybe there's some other missile system that's going to be provided there, but what that suggested to me And what's amazing is Fox News apparently can never cover this. Mainstream media can manage to never cover this. I mean, it's starting to slip through, like Reuters and some other publications. It's starting to filter out that this appears to me to be a game of one big dangerous bluff, and that I think at different times Trump has been convinced that Russia's just about to collapse, and you're helping Putin by helping him get out of this war. That I think that pitch has been made to sort of unite the two sides of Trump's personality in approaching Russia. And he seems to convince himself for a period of time that the sanctions are going to be game changers, and a unilateral ceasefire is going to be a game changer. And now it's the Tomahawk, and giving him logistics to fire deep into Russia is going to be a game changer. And it's like, yeah, it might be a game changer, but not in a way you want, given the kind of risk it escalates. I thought Putin handled it well in the way that I think Trump would have, if Russia would have come out really strong, said this is a big red line, no way, Trump, I think, would have unfortunately misinterpreted that as weakness. He'd been, okay, this does scare him. This really does frighten him. Okay, maybe this can work, and get stuck on that escalatory ladder. When Putin didn't respond that way, he was like, it's an old weapon. We'll deal with it. Not good. It'll probably put peace talks with the U.S., rapprochement talks on the back burner if it exists at all. But he wasn't going to give off the impression to someone like Trump, and I think Putin reads Trump better than any leader in the world, that he wasn't going to give Trump any sense of this is something that scares me. This is something that intimidates me. This is something that worries us. This is something that's going to change our negotiation position, because it ain't, because he was, cool like Fonzie from Happy Days. So, is that an example of where this obsessive bluffing strategy that Trump seems to be employing is very dangerous? Because if somehow long-range weapons do end up being used and used successfully in some manner, I'm talking about focusing on just energy infrastructure, but let's say some other disaster happens, you could be at the risk of, it violates a Russia red line that is justification for their use of nuclear weapons, because Tomahawks can't carry nuclear warheads. So how risky is it if Trump were to actually go forward with the Kellogg plan and it were to, quote unquote, succeed? That may be the greatest danger of all for U.S. peace.
And these missiles have to be fired by NATO or the United States. That's the problem. Even if Tomahawks are not delivered to Ukraine, and say they deliver Taurus missiles, the German Taurus missiles, or they deliver these new Barracuda missiles, which have never been really tested, but still, you deliver these long-range missiles to Ukraine. Putin made it a point to say that these missiles are going to be fired by the United States or by NATO, and we know this, and everyone knows this, he said. And he said it twice. He said it once at Valdai, and he said it a second time with an interview with Zarubin, who's the Kremlin journalist. So he made it a point to say it twice. If these missiles are fired into Russia from Ukraine, you're not fooling anybody. We know that this was fired by the United States or by NATO. You also have to look at it from the perspective of the reason we have this war. The reason we have this war was the fear of long-range missiles in Ukraine. And now you have the United States, Trump, the entire collective West talking about putting long-range missiles in Ukraine. So, the whole thing, whoever advised Trump to go down this path of talking about the Tomahawks, in my opinion, wanted to sabotage any type of détente or rapprochement with the United States, and they have succeeded. They've succeeded because you've put Putin in a difficult place where he's having these negotiations with the United States. He's having these talks with Trump. They're trying to figure a way to reestablish relations, diplomacy, to normalize things. And what does he now have to deal with? He has to deal with the fact that Trump is saying that he's going to send long-range missiles to Ukraine. They could have nuclear warheads. They have a range of 2,000 kilometers or 2,500 miles, whatever it is. And our goal is to hit Russian energy facilities, but we're not seeking escalation, he says. And the whole thing is just confusion, and it's crazy. And Putin has to now deal with this stuff. And he's got the hardliners like Medvedev telling him, you can't continue to talk to Trump like this, and you're taking a soft line. Meanwhile, he has to try to prevent some sort of escalation or some sort of World War III escalation. And Trump is not making it easy to get some sort of rapprochement with Russia, or to try and de-escalate the things in Ukraine. He's making it harder. And the fact that you've now thrown Tomahawk missiles into the equation, you've pretty much submarined any progress that was made during Alaska.
Well, I mean, hypothetically, what happened? Trump walks away. I'm reading the chat. They say Trump should have walked away. He's getting, further deeper into talks of nuclear war. If Trump walks away, is there not a risk that Europe does something stupid in order to escalate, or that Ukraine does something extremely stupid, like some false flag type thing to justify Article 5 or whatever?
This is where we go back to what Alex was saying earlier, because of course, just walking away in itself was not enough. You need to get the Ukrainians and the Europeans to one side and say, look, the United States has made this decision. Game over. This is the point where you've got to sit down and negotiate. The United States is not going to be involved. And I think, knowing the realities in Europe, I think they'd have gone along with it. There would have been, exactly as Alex said, fury and rage, lots of complaints. People would have, shouted and said that the US was betraying Europe, which is a ridiculous thing to say. How can the United States be betraying Europe by not committing itself to a war on behalf of a European project? But anyway, there would have been rage, but they would have accepted it. And here I think there's something else to say. And it goes back to the point that Alex was making, and indeed the point that Robert was also making, and where we come back to the issue of strategic empathy. Now, I've been to Russia, I've spoken to Russians, I follow and read a lot of things that people in Russia says. And I've also someone who takes an interest in and feels very close to the United States. It may surprise people in the United States to know that in Russia, there would be a very, very strong constituency of people, probably a critical mass of people within the elite, who, if they were offered a rapprochement, a real détente with the United States, they would seize it with both hands. There is a fundamental difference between Russian attitudes towards Europe and Russian attitudes towards the United States that goes back very far indeed. The Russians see the United States very differently from the way that they see the Europeans. They see the Europeans as dangerous. They want the United States to remain in Europe. Oh, and I say this to people, it always surprises them. But the Russians, from a Russian point of view, this is where strategic empathy comes in. The Russians have fought many wars with the Europeans. Napoleon invaded them. The Germans invaded them. The British, by the way, have also invaded them. The United States never has. So from their point of view, they feel that their country, huge continental country, enormous resources, tremendous science, technology, it's in some ways like the United States. They can relate to the United States. They can talk to the United States, or that's what they want to do, because for them, it is a path forward. Now, if they were confident that a deal with the United States like that was possible and it would stick, they might be prepared to make certain moves in Europe, even in Ukraine, in order to calm American concerns and to make the pathway for the Americans easier. The problem is that they don't see that at the moment, and that is why they themselves are drifting back into a policy of seeking an outright victory in Ukraine. It goes directly back to that issue of strategic empathy, which Robert was talking about.
And Alex, in touring Russia, where I think you currently are, the beautiful time of year to be there, I've heard from all the experts that the Russian economy is completely falling apart. Has no future. Even my friend Vice President Vance was putting out something I think is gibberish, whether he was just talking script because he has to, or he honestly believes it. If he honestly believes it, he needs to fire anyone who gave him that advice, in my opinion. But can you tell us, is the Russian economy collapsing? from your personal view as well as a view of the evidence?
No, I don't see it. Is it going through hard times, especially with regard to inflation and interest rates? Yeah, but I would say most of the world is having those difficulties. But it's very normal here. I would say, Robert, just very normal. And the other thing that really struck me being here this time around is that I am seeing Russia moving completely away from Europe. Last time I was here, I still saw some connection to Europe, some things that overlapped. This time around, I feel like I'm in the East. I'm not in the West anymore, and I'm in Moscow, and Moscow is Europe, right? I mean, but I feel like I'm in the East, and I don't have any connections whatsoever to Europe or the West, not even Eastern Europe. I mean, I really feel it this time around, and I think that's interesting. Russia is, for all intents and purposes, completely now to the East.
Well, and now in a good way or in a bad way? Because I'm trying to understand what that,
In a different way. In a different way. Yeah, in a
philosophically?
different way. Like just from you know going to purchase things, from using the Mir card, even stuff like the SMS, like the text messaging system. Everything's either being cut off from the West, and it's just on a whole different system, a whole different track, or there's no, you don't see any types of businesses, restaurants. I mean, you just don't see the Western influence here anymore at all. For example, the cars on the streets now, I have to say, are about, in Moscow, it feels like it's 70-80% Chinese cars. I mean, that's the sense that I get. It's probably a lot less. It's probably like 50-50. But the sense that I get in every taxi that I've been in has been some Chinese car, and half of them I have no idea what they are. I mean, I know BYD, but I know it's Xiaomi and BYD, but the other cars I have no idea what they are. And sometimes I talk to the Yandex drivers, to what's the Uber drivers in Moscow, and I asked them about the cars. How are they? You like them? They're like, yeah, we're happy with them. I used to have a Honda. Or I used to drive a Mercedes or whatever, but now I've got this Xiaomi or this BYD, and it's all good.
I've never even heard of these. I mean, I'm not much of a car aficionado to begin with, but now I wonder if they're cheap crap. Sorry,
I know it's the explosion of the Chinese electric car market, and that they've been improving. And at a certain point, they were way behind, like Elon and others, and Tesla. Tesla still has an edge because it has an edge over everybody. But the China's making huge leapfrogs in that area. Now, speaking of like how Putin's recent speech, where he basically confirmed what Alex just said, the divorce from Europe is here and done. And that Putin was a long time perceived, at least in Russia, as more of a Europhile than a Europhobe, but that great opportunity for the reincorporation of Russia into Europe now appears to be lost. The same risk poses to the U.S., and as you pointed out, maybe Putin's path of divorcing from Europe would be well advised for the United States. Can you give us a sense, Alexander, of just what a disaster it is right now in Starmer in Britain, Merz in Germany, the complete fall of Macron's government in France, the Meloni struggling in Italy after betraying the more popular side of her promises in her campaign, the EU being this project that, as Viktor Orban recently said, is dying and will soon be dead, so we don't want to join the euro. In Hungary, the Czech elections had a populist resurgence once again. They had to interfere in the Moldovan elections, interfere in the Romania elections, and even then they barely got over them. I mean, they used to be able to steal elections better. They need to send the Lyndon Baines Johnson how to steal an election to the EU so they could do it better in Moldova next time.
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
And then Georgia regime change coup, etc. Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've given a description of the realities across Europe, which is a very, very accurate one. And to that, by the way, I would add, I mean, just as a little detail, we are currently witnessing the conference the party conference of the Conservative Party of Britain, the party of Churchill and Disraeli and Thatcher and all of these people, the titanic figures of our past, and there is nobody there. There is hardly anybody there. The hall, you see it, is empty. And in order to attract people, they're actually offering a seance. And I'm not exaggerating. They've got a post box, and you write a letter to Margaret Thatcher, and you're supposed to post it to her. And that's what they do. I mean, it is an astonishing situation right across Europe. And you spoke about Macron, and we've done programs about this on the Duran, about the absolute chaos that Macron has created in France. How he's completely destabilized the situation there, how he's bored about governing France, that he really doesn't address the problems of the French people. And there is a single thread that unites all of these problems. And that is that in the 2000s, the early 2000s, we imposed on ourselves in Europe this, early 90s actually, going back, we imposed upon ourselves this structure above ourselves, a bureaucracy completely unelected, completely unaccountable, which is the European Union. There is a European Parliament, but it is a joke. It hardly functions. It certainly doesn't function as any kind of proper parliament. We've had this bureaucracy that was created because there was this idea that we would that way achieve the kind of economies of scale that the United States has, and we would emulate the economic achievements of the United States, completely failing to understand our own economic geography, the fact that the whole economic vitality of Europe has come from the fact that we are states, European states, nation states, governed by governments that are directly electorally accountable to us as a nation, constantly in competition with each other. That is where we have in the past gained our energy and our dynamism from. That's been completely taken away. We now have a kind of bureaucratic structure which regulates, because that's all it knows how to do. It regulates constantly, and it is doing the same thing that all para state structures in Europe have done again since the time of Napoleon, in order to pursue this mirage of European integration. They seek to unite all of the European states in a crusade against Russia, which has been a disaster as well. So you see this happen in every European country, governments losing legitimacy, political leaders losing legitimacy because they're no longer ultimately accountable to the people. Their accountability, to the extent that it exists, is to the structures that exist in Brussels. And Europe, therefore, is in rapid and terminal decline. And as soon as this is understood in the United States, and a divorce from this rotten structure is made, the better. Because the risk is that while things continue in this way, what Europe is doing is it's pulling America down with it.
Exactly.
Did I understand that they're writing letters because like letters for political inspiration to a woman who's been dead for over a decade?
You are absolutely correct. That is exactly what is happening.
It's like a political wailing wall, like people putting their wishes in the cracks of the wall and just hoping that they divine a spirit.
Exactly, the divine spirit of the leader of the great leader. I mean, that tells you. That tells you that this is, as I said, this is the Conservative Party.
It's actually not a bad idea when you think about Stammer and whoever's in the UK government. You might as well hope that Thatcher does something from the great beyond.
Well, I mean, it'll definitely be a good candidate for one of Alex's clown world. I think what's always fascinating here, I see a lot of the modern American left, that the doesn't appreciate the history of politicized violence, and in including leftist politicized violence. Like people like my niece and some other people think, oh, politicized violence is only a right wing thing, and it's like the historical amnesia we have in the U.S. Of course, Weather Underground, Black Panthers, other groups. Black Panthers were integrated with gangs, so it's kind of a different animal. But Weather Underground probably the most paramount example. But who really got rocked by a lot of leftist violence was Europe. And Alex, there's a lot of debate here in the U.S. about how to deal with Antifa. And I've been trying to point out to people here, if you understand their history to the Black Bloc, go back further to Antifa, was about northern Italy, parts of Germany, that may have been formed in the guise of protecting against the fascists, but was often a sort of a violent regime to be this sort of paramilitary version, this violent element that they could use that's privatized to get political objectives. But briefly, could you remind people that the long history of sort of leftist violence in Europe, going back a century, and how that that is a real thing and is something that poses ongoing risks. I mean, you could argue the left got partially hijacked throughout the 70s with its extreme different red army, this group, that red group, all the different, I forget all the, different groups, little drummer girl, John le Carre style portraying in Germany. But that Antifa is not some, according to some historians here, in quotes, in America, this Antifa doesn't even exist. It's not a thing. It's never existed. There's no real history of leftist violence. What does the lessons of Europe tell us about that?
No, Antifa's been around for forever. At least I'll tell you, in Greece, Antifa's it was and is everywhere. I mean, when I do a lot of my videos, if you notice the graffiti, just about half of the graffiti that you'll see as I'm walking around Athens, Greece, you'll see Antifa spray painted everywhere. They have a huge presence in Greece, and actually at the time of Tsipras, who was for Syriza, which was branded as the radical left party that won the elections about 10, 15 years ago. He was very much of that radical left, and they won the elections, and he became the prime minister in Greece. And he branded himself as someone who was going to take a very hard line against the globalists. And I'm a man of the left, of the far left, and I'm going to initiate these programs, and I'm going to move away from the entire globalist agenda. In 24 hours, he went to the European Union with the mandate of the Greek people to go against any type of EU austerity that was being imposed on Greece. They said, yes, we support you. Go to the EU, tell them to F off. We don't want austerity. We don't want any of this globalism crap. He went to the European Union. This is like the big radical left Antifa support. He has all the support of these guys, right? And he goes up to the European Union and he signs everything that the EU puts on in front of him, right? So he becomes fully integrated into the globalist cause. And I think that showcases what Antifa really is. Yeah, they present this radical left cause, this anti-globalist, anti-fascist cause. But when you really dig deep into what Antifa is, it's very much part of the globalist system. And it was a hard lesson for us to learn in Greece, a very hard lesson, to the point where even the Communist Party, the KKE, which is a real communist party. I mean, they're like the real deal, right? They have a small amount of support, single digits, very low, but still, they're the real deal. These guys have books of Lenin and Marx, right? Even they were screaming, saying, "Oh my God, these Antifa guys, these Syriza guys, they're going to ruin it for the left forever," right? And they were just completely upset about everything that happened to them. But yeah, Antifa's been around forever in Europe. It's been around forever in Greece. It still is around, but we've learned hard lessons in supporting these types of causes. Very hard lessons, economic hard lessons, which we still feel today.
And Alexander, before we transition into other hotspots around the world, because there's people in the Pentagon who want us to be on 3 different continents waging 3 different wars at the same time: Iran, Venezuela, Russia. The insanity just keeps rising as the incompetency exceeds. But the one last question on Europe, the great, the old Prussians, Bismarck and the like, helped create the beginnings of the social safety net system. And we're seeing in Germany, they're talking about raising the retirement age to 73. Because Zelensky needs a little more coke, so you got to make some trade-offs. We see in Britain, even the Labour Party contemplating cuts in social benefits and other issues, and also to help fund the Ukraine war. We see Macron never be able to get any of his reforms through meaningfully, be a disaster of a president outside of his own vanity mirror. What is the future of Europe? Is Orban right? Do these populist rebellions indicate the end of the EU project? And what about the social safety net? Might it all disappear in the continent that helped birth it?
Well, if things continue as they are, it will indeed disappear, because it can only function. A social safety net like the kind that we used to have in Europe, the kind that Bismarck created and which was then imitated by other European countries, that can only happen if there is a strong underpinning from the economy. And of course, that isn't there anymore. And it also, by the way, needs something else, which is it needs a great deal of social solidarity within the society in which it functions. Because if that isn't there, then it would inevitably attracts corruption. It begins to break down in all sorts of ways. And that's something else that we've been seeing in Europe. And it very rapidly degenerates into a kind of clientage system, which we also have in Europe too. So the way to try to support all of these things is to try to bring back economic and political and social energy into Europe. And that can only happen if we get rid of this enormous superstructure that we have created for ourselves, and which has been such a complete political disaster for us. Now, can I just return to the point about leftist violence? I was a student in Britain and in Europe in the 1970s. I remember leftist violence very well then. I used to travel to Germany, where the Rote Army faction, the Baader-Meinhof, was very active. I remember being astonished to see how much traction it had within the German student community and within the Dutch student community, which I also knew. I remember the Red Brigades, the Brigate Rossi in Italy. You had lower levels, but nonetheless real levels of violence in France too. All of these directed in the usual strange ways that we see now, but absolutely leftist violence in Europe has much, very, very long history in Europe indeed. And Antifa was already, as I well remember, an actual presence in Berlin when I used to go to Germany in the 70s, even though I didn't go to Berlin in those days. But, anybody who says that this is a European phenomenon, in my opinion, the whole new left thing originates in Europe. It is connected with the entire intellectual currents towards postmodernism that developed in Europe in the 1950s and 1960s, and which were then imported into the United States. I don't want to give the impression that all bad things in the United States come from Europe, but there are European traditions and European political movements and problems which it would have been much better if the United States had steered clear from.
No doubt about that. Speaking of conflicts to steer clear from, the President of the United States said just a few months ago that we didn't just bomb some side of a mountain. We absolutely obliterated. He loved that word, obliterated Iran's nuclear capacity. And now all of a sudden I see Bibi Netanyahu talking about how they're going to have ballistic missiles that can hit Washington, D.C. I was just waiting for Bibi to explain that Iran has developed space lasers, and we got to get ready quickly because they're going to be attacking from space. So we got to take out the regime now. This looks to me like a fig leaf for regime change in Iran that has been the long obsession of Bibi Netanyahu, for which weapons of mass destruction has long been his excuse for getting in. but it does look that we're shipping massive amounts of the capacity, at least, to wage war, a more extensive, continuous war with Iran, based on military assets and Trump's latest language. Now, I hope that it's a bluff, but then the problem is how you bluff yourself into war. So I think it's partially how Trump got there the first time. I think he really thought, hey, Bibi will go crazy, Iran, unless you give me what I want on the nuclear deal, even though he was asking things Iran could not do other than be suicidal. And then he got caught in an actual war because as soon as the real negotiations were on the eve of finalizing, Israel attacks. Trump pretends to later take credit for it, which only further damages Trump in the court of global public opinion by looking like someone that's untrustworthy and unreliable. And so, what is the risk, Alex, of going back into Iran? And is this another example of this madman theory strategy constantly backfiring on Trump himself? That the Iranians can't trust the IEA, can't trust the U.S., can't trust negotiations because of what happened last time. And given that the director of national intelligence, which Trump hated being reminded of last time, concluded that Iran was nowhere near nuclear weapons, and what we found out since then is that, in fact, her report was exactly right, that they were at least 2 years away, according to internal Israeli intelligence, that they hid from the Trump administration first time around. So what's the risk we end up going back into Iran, and what's the risk that looks a lot different a second time around?
The risk is very high. It looks like something is going to go down probably by the end of the year. And the fear that I have, that Alexander has, we've discussed this in many videos, is that the United States is going to be much more involved this time around. And I think that is the great risk. Last time around, Trump kind of got sucked into it. You could make the argument that Israel and the United States were not prepared for the retaliation of Iran and all the missiles that they were firing. They ended up being depleted of a lot of weapons, so they had to pull back a bit. This time around, it looks like the United States is moving much more military hardware into the region in preparation for a bigger war and for a longer war. And probably you're going to, if this thing does fire off, probably you're going to see the same strategy employed in the first time around, which is going to be some sort of decapitation strike or some sort of operation to take out the leadership early. Most likely that will not work. And then you're going to be looking at some sort of a longer operation. But it does appear as if the United States and Israel is preparing for that scenario.
Alexander, we couldn't even win a war with the Houthis using those Kellogg's great weapon-changing tomahawks, the Houthis. But apparently, we're going to win easily this conflict with Iran. If you talk about what some of the risks are, let's assume a regime change doesn't happen, or if regime change did happen, what migration crisis that could create. Combine Syria, Iraq, and Libya, you could probably fit them all population-wise within Iran. What that might look like from a migration crisis to Europe and other parts of the world, all the different terror cells that may emerge from an internal civil war. Some of those downsides, even if it succeeds at the regime change, and assuming it fails at the regime change, how Israel seemed to be about to lose the war with Iran towards the end of it. What kind of triggers could we have from that?
Well, indeed. I mean, I think we discussed this in a previous stream that we did together. But let's just reconstruct this. Iran is a huge country. I think it's 95 million people. It is an enormous territory. It is very mountainous. It has its industrial competencies. It is not a completely, place which it's not like Vietnam in 1960s, for example. It's much more developed than that. And of course, it now has friends. I mean, it's got friends with China. It's got friends with Russia. It's got a very close relationship, which it's developed significantly over the last few months and which has gone below the radar with Pakistan, which, remember, is a nuclear power. So I always, if there is an attack on Iran, the big question is how strong is the regime? Will the regime absorb the blow, or will it crumble? If it absorbs the blow, if it's able to take the blow when it comes, because I don't think anybody is seriously talking about sending ground troops into Iran, which would be an enormous act of folly, as I said, against an enormous country. If the regime remains stable, then inevitably over time, the balance of the pendulum starts to shift in its favor, because you can attack Iran, you can kill lots of people, you can do enormous amount of damage, but it will then start to hit back as it did during the June War. It will have friends who might be incentivized to help it. And as we have seen in many instances in the last few years, our resiliency in the face of this kind of challenge is not as great as some people perhaps would imagine it to be. Israel, in particular, is a relatively small country as opposed to Iran, which is a huge country. That already gives Iran a strategic advantage, a degree of strategic depth, which Israel arguably lacks. Of course, the United States is in a different position completely, but the United States is far away, and a long war with Iran would be deeply controversial, one assumes, in the United States also. So I can very easily see, if the regime survives, how this could be a debacle. It could create a major crisis for Israel. Israel might be pushed to take extreme measures to protect itself. And of course, if these extend to using Israel's nuclear arsenal, which is a possibility I don't want to discuss or analyze because it terrifies me so much, well, then we're in a completely different world. So that's what happens if we attack Iran, have no plan to end the war, and it goes wrong. If it succeeds, if the regime collapses, then again, we have a very complex society, one which we don't understand very well. There are large numbers of armed men across Iran involved in many institutions, military institutions, paramilitary institutions, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and all of that. It is very, very easy to see how that could also generate a long term crisis in the Middle East. And the lesson of recent wars in the Middle East is that it's possible to start them and initially to think that they're going well, only over time the problems grow and ultimately become intractable. So I would have thought that the United States absolutely would not want to do this thing. I don't see that there is a good outcome in the end.
Speaking of
The reporting, they
Sorry, go
reported they totally obliterated the nuclear facilities. What would be the rationale and the justification for going back in now?
Well, presumably that Iran is going to rebuild its nuclear facilities. I mean, they say that they completely destroyed the Iranian nuclear facilities, and they might very well have destroyed the Iranian nuclear facilities that they attacked. But this is a huge country. There are reports that the Iranians have been building another place to enrich uranium in another mountain near the city, I believe, of Isfahan, and apparently it's even deeper than Fordow. There's complete uncertainty about whether all the enriched uranium that Iran had, the very highly enriched uranium that Iran had, whether that has all been destroyed or kept out of use. So there are those fears. And this brings us back to the problem. Can we stop Iran acquiring nuclear weapons by attacking it, if that is what Iran does intend to do? Some people I know, who I respect, say no. And then what is the alternative? Well, diplomatic action, isolating those people in Iran who are the hardliners through using diplomatic action. And China and Russia absolutely do not want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. And Iran needs the help of China and Russia if it is to stabilize its economy for the long term. So maybe diplomacy, negotiations, as appeared to work fairly well before, that might be a better way than a war that has very unpredictable results, and which seems to me recklessly risky.
Speaking of which, Alex, we've seen another aspect of Iran before we transition over to another country we're thinking about getting into a war with, Venezuela. How much is the failure of these internationalist globalist institutions like the IEA, or maybe the International Atomic Agency, that basically, I mean, people in Iran have suspicions that they gave the names of the scientists to Israel so they could be murdered by Israel. I mean, Israel murdered their families, other people. They don't have the civilian shield excuse for that, FYI. I found it morally horrendous that you murder a kid because his dad's a scientist. I'm sorry, I'm not on board. But putting that, my moral objection aside, this is bad strategy of what these like the IEA guy, I guess, is going to bounce up to the UN or someplace. That caused all this nonsense. We've got that it's like all the losers of Europe keep getting promoted. It's like, von der Leyen sucks at Germany, so what do you do? Well, let's just put her in charge of all of Europe. Oh, that's great. Baerbock is over here making embarrassment of herself on a daily basis at the UN, as you pointed out recently. Standing on a crate to make her look taller. Yeah. This is embarrassing. This is like, the high heels that Ron DeSantis liked and Marco Rubio used to like.
She's the president, Robert Barr, the president.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the UN General Assembly.
How much of the what has happened in Iran is the fault of the failure of these institutions to do their job and to be true, independent, neutral arbiters? There's like almost the Cold War forced some of these institutions to be more independent than they are now. After the Cold War, we thought, we get a peace dividend. Instead, they've been co-opted by one side in such a way that they fail to deliver. And we may get nuclear proliferation because of the incompetency of the agency charged with nuclear non-proliferation.
Yeah, Grassi of the IAEA, he's gunning for the president of the United Nations. That's what he's looking for. It was the IAEA that released the document about Iran and the uranium enrichment on a Thursday. The attack happened on a Friday, but the interesting part is that Witkoff was negotiating with the Iranian foreign minister. They were on the 7th round of technical talks, and earlier in the week, both of them came out with statements and said things are looking very good. We're on a positive track. Both Witkoff and Arakchi, they both said we are progressing. And everyone was thinking, okay, we've avoided war. We've avoided some sort of conflict. And then the IAEA comes along. They publish this document, and Netanyahu jumps on it, and you get to the 12-day war. So, I mean, the Iranians are right to not trust the IAEA, and they're right to not allow the IAEA back in. And what's the consequence of that is no one knows where the uranium went, where this uranium that Alexandra is talking about. There's no international body to track this stuff, to say, okay, it's in this city or it's in this area or this bunker. So now everyone is wondering, where is the uranium? Where is this stuff? And it's because of the tricks and the games that these institutions are playing.
Speaking of another place we may go to war, is Venezuela. I had some people telling me the other day, Barnes, you need to read up about the sun, the cartel of the sun and da. Well, I'll tell you that cartel is mostly a non-factor in the drug trade, and the Venezuelan government isn't running it, operating it anyway. And Venezuela is a very small role in the drug trade in general. And you might think I'm quoting some sort of wacky source. Again, I'm quoting Director Gabbard of the Director of National Intelligence report from March of this year. You can read it there. So it appears that we have a fig leaf. Now, maybe Trump really believes it, because you're never really sure what he knows or doesn't know. But if he believes otherwise, if he believes that secret that Venezuela is the hot spot for all the drug cartel activity, then he's ignoring his own director of national intelligence, as unfortunately he did with Iran, as unfortunately he did with Russia, in betrayal to his voters, who he promised to promote Tulsi Gabbard for the explicit and express purpose of avoiding this. We're busy blowing up random boats and would say, don't worry, there are definitely a bunch of drugs on there. Well, what's the proof? Can you not show me? They have yet to show one single piece of proof. People like Kurt Mills, close with Steve Bannon, part of sort of the young populist right, has said that the Hegseth is getting false intel and information. That it's not, that they don't have anywhere near the certainty that they claim to for blowing up these boats off the Venezuelan coast. But putting that aside, they're talking about, there's articles in the New York Times. I get these people say, "Boy, what are you talking about? Risk of war with Venezuela." Now, that's a sign of how bad the Trump administration has prepped people if we do go in, because recent surveys by YouGov, a UK-based pollster originally, showed that overwhelmingly Republicans oppose a war in Venezuela. Independents, 9% support a war with Venezuela. And they did a recent survey, by the way, back on the Iran question. Give the least popular position that Trump has done, that they polled them all in the Harvard-Harris poll. The least popular one amongst Republicans was his prior attacks on Iran. Imagine what that would look like a second time around without the ability to say we obliterated their nuclear weapons and we were in and out without major consequence, because we got a ceasefire through the Qataris right on the verge of disaster, with Iran closing the Straits of Hormuz, oil prices spiking, chaos globally, and Israel losing that war. Now we're talking about going into Venezuela, massive long coastline. It's bordered by two major countries, Colombia and Brazil. What's unique about them right now? Both countries are very hostile to the United States of America and Trump. They're not. Lula's not a Trump fan. The Colombian president is not a Trump fan. We're busy suspending people's visas from Colombia. We've got paramilitaries throughout the rural areas, going back to FARC, going back to the old, talk about old left-wing violence. It's the Latin American version of that. For years, all the way back to Hugo Chavez, Venezuela has been preparing to defend itself, not by an institutional army, but by a massive militia. We don't know how strong or weak that even is. But people like Colonel McGregor, longtime military advisor, looked at it and said it would be far from easy to win an actual war with Venezuela in the way people think. And this feels to me like Panama Part 2. For those who don't remember, Poppy Bush went into Panama, replaced Noriega in the name of fighting drugs. We're fighting drugs. Once again, how did that work? Did the drug trade go down after Noriega was taken out? Maybe it had nothing to do with it, folks. Yeah. But can you tell me what are some of the risks of war with Venezuela?
Well, can I just say, first of all, that my wife was recently in Mexico, and she had some discussions with some people there, pretty well-connected people, and they were absolutely baffled about this talk about Venezuela being the center of the international drugs trade and the government of Venezuela being that. And they said, yes, well, Venezuela does play a role, but it's a relatively small one. If you want to find a left-wing government that is heavily implicated in the drug cartels, look at our government here in Mexico. It's much, much more deeply involved than the Venezuelans are. And apparently there were all kinds of reasons for this, which I'm not going to go into, but they're basically connected with the kind of structure of power there and the way in which the Venezuelan government is organized, which are not flattering to Venezuela at all. But anyway, that is what she heard. I'm not able to verify any of this because I don't actually know very much about the international drugs trade. What I will say is this: I think that it is a universally accepted fact that across the history of Latin American independence, going back to the 1820s, there has been intense involvement by the United States. Sometimes it has been positive. The original Monroe Doctrine, which people do not know, was intended to protect the Latin American states that were gaining independence from Spain, from intervention by the conservative powers of Europe that might have wanted to restore the Spanish monarchy. So, that was the original Monroe Doctrine of the 1820s. But since then, as we know, things have not always been good. And the result has been that there is a very, very powerful tradition, which Catherine, my wife, also encountered in Mexico, of hostility to the United States and extreme suspicion of intervention by the United States in Latin American affairs. And this is deep rooted, and it's very, very much part of the political climate there. And I have to say this, if the United States goes into Venezuela, I don't know how strong the Venezuelan military is. I don't know how well organized the militias are. I don't know whether anybody in Washington does, by the way. I don't know how deep and intense and well researched this all is. But what I do know is that Venezuela is a very big country. It is, again, a very complex society. Large areas of it are mountainous and not easy to access. This is a region, a part of the world where there has been a long history of political violence and insurgencies. You mentioned the FARC, which was active in Colombia until fairly recently. I can very, very easily see how an American intervention in Venezuela could start all of that up all over again, create political chaos in Venezuela, encounter extreme hostility from other South American states, and you mentioned Colombia and Brazil. It will also be something that would not be well received around the world. It would not be well received amongst the BRIC states, for example. It would probably damage the US's international reputation at this time. And I can't help but think the political crisis in Venezuela is going to achieve the opposite of what it's supposed to do with respect to the drugs trade. Because if such government as Venezuela currently has collapses, then surely that's going to make it easier for people to traffic drugs through Venezuela and the Caribbean and to Europe and the United States. So again, I don't really see the upside to this. Maduro is clearly a difficult man. One can have huge arguments with the government of Venezuela, and I can understand that. But surely this is a Venezuelan problem and a problem for the people of Venezuela to sort out. And if you're dealing with drugs, as I said, which is a worthy cause, there are other places and other ways to do it better. Maybe first and foremost in the United States itself. Secondly, in those other countries in Latin America, like Colombia and Ecuador and Mexico. And by the way, Brazil, where it is arguably a still bigger problem.
Speaking of which, concerning BRICS, that one interpretation would be that the dying globalist empire centered in places like the city of London and Washington, D.C. and its suburbs wants to just wage kinetic war against BRICS as a way to deal with it. One way they do so is through mass sanctions policies. We've seen that with Venezuela. There's still a lot of denial. While I am by no stretch a fan of the Maduro regime and think its policies produce the outcome that we see, they can quite credibly point to mass sanctions by the U.S. on Venezuela as the more likely probable cause for its domestic constituency to attribute it. We have done massive sanctions against Cuba for forever. No sign that that's ever led to any change of government. Arguably, it's consolidated power. Mass sanctions against Duran. Once again, no sign that it has changed anything except consolidated power. Mass sanctions against Russia, and all that did was Europe cut its own feet off. I don't know how Europe's going to militarize when it has no industrial base, and it can have no industrial base as long as energy is too expensive. I don't know. Vander Crazy was out doing her AI speech. Somebody needs to tell Vander Crazy that take a double look at the energy cost associated with AI data centers. It's an issue, right? Big issue here in the United States currently. It was how we're going to try to handle that. Well, for some reason, we want to push all of the energy-rich countries against us. Venezuela, energy-rich. The Saudi Arabia is energy-rich, but so is Iran. Russia, energy-rich. And push them into the welcome loving arms of the big panda in China. How much do you think, Alex, that this strategy of waging economic and kinetic war against BRICS, with the broader context of do sanctions ever work really anyway from an economic policy, or do they just hurt poor people and help actual tyrants consolidate power, not mitigate their power? There's that aspect. And also in general BRICS, it appears that the best gift to BRICS has been this Western hostile approach, that it is proving to places like India why they need BRICS, why they want BRICS. Because your president of the United States may wake up one day and do 100% sanctions disguised as tariffs because of some foreign policy somewhere. You could see it rattled Trump. The big, the meeting of the walk with China's Xi in the middle, Putin on the left, Modi on the right. You can tell that shook his sentiment. Well, it turns out kinetic war and sanctions is a dumb strategy, Mr. President, for dealing with BRICS. Maybe just saying. But what do you think, Alex, about is the Western world making BRICS stronger by its hostility?
Absolutely. Trump is helping to build BRICS, right? He's accelerating the building and the success of BRICS. Trump should be there. He should be there with Putin, with Xi, and with Modi, walking with them. He should be there in order for the United States to shape the multipolar world. He needs a seat at the table in order for the United States to be there and to help usher in the multipolar world. But he's not at the table, and he's going against BRICS. And once again, you have guys like Lindsey Graham and all of these guys like Kellogg whispering in Trump's ear, telling Trump that he has to destroy BRICS because BRICS' purpose is to destroy the United States and to destroy the dollar. And that's not the right position. He's weaponizing tariffs in much the same way that previous administrations, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, weaponized sanctions. And that has been one of my biggest disappointments with Trump, the weaponization of tariffs. We've done many, many videos. We've done many live streams with you, Robert, where we've talked about tariffs in detail. As a policy, yes, the way Trump envisioned tariffs way in the beginning, interesting, different, probably could work. Why not give it a shot? But he weaponized it, and he turned it into some sort of foreign policy weapon where he can now go to India and say, if you don't stop buying Russian oil, 100% tariffs. And India's saying, what the F is going on here? What are you talking about? 100% tariffs. Does the same thing with China. He's doing it with every country. Instead of using tariffs to bring industry back to the United States, to present something different to the American people, to give it a shot and see how it works out, he listened to the people like Lindsey Graham. He listened to all of these neocons, and they took tariffs and they just turned them into a different type of sanctions. And this has helped accelerate the building of BRICS because the countries are saying, you know what? You guys were going after us with sanctions for so many years. Now we've got to deal with tariffs being weaponized against us. We need something new. We need a new system, a new architecture. And there's BRICS right there.
And Alexander, you mentioned that as we look at this broader, we see the rise of BRICS. We see Russia shifting towards Asia. We see a more unity amongst the global South. We see the decline of the European project, the fading of U.S. military power to be able to project it around the world. I think that's one thing that frustrates Trump. I think that meeting a few weeks back with the generals was originally intended to take Colonel McGregor's ideas for reorganizing the military, including getting rid of a lot of the generals, to reorganize it from offensive to defensive posture, to focus on areas of interest, the spheres of influence determined by geography, not by anything else. That he had proposed, he wrote it in detail because he was advising Robert Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy, Secretary Kennedy, shared it throughout the Trump administration. Daniel Davis has recently gone public with his facts, so I now can talk about it. But early on, Hegseth was literally reading from it. You can see parts where Hegseth was reading from it. And it was sort of an intellectualized version of MAGA that someone like McGregor, who spent a long time studying it, part of the first Trump administration, had put together the plans to get us out of Afghanistan without the disaster. Unfortunately, Trump waltzed out at the end, didn't do it, and then we got the disaster. That's why he keeps complaining about the Bagram Air Base. His plan would have kept U.S. control of the Bagram Air Base. But he didn't execute it. He decided not to. So kind of on him. And he doesn't want to admit he screwed up. Rather than listening to McGregor, listen to the deep state crowd, and he got a political bonus issue against Biden, but lost the geopolitical significance. And by contrast, we're seeing the rise of BRICS, all of these other dynamics across the Asian subcontinent, India with a long history of hostility. I mean, to what degree are we seeing the end of empire, particularly the Western empire, and in terms of the path? And then the only question becomes, can we get to the end of that empire without a world war in between?
What we are seeing is this end of this period of European dominance that began in the 16th century. What the Europeans very successfully did, especially the British, was that after the Second World War, they, even as their own power was ebbing away, they managed to bring the United States in. They said, look, we've had this terrible war in the Second World War, and you've got to be involved with us, and you've got to prop us up, because we have certain cultural similarities to you, and you have certain cultural similarities to us, and you must make this preservation of our dominance, of our system, because it was the Europeans who created this global system. You must make this your project as well. And the result was that the United States stopped being what it had been previously, which was the self-sufficient democratic republic which its founders had envisaged, one which sought peace with most of the countries of the world, focused on economic and social development in the United States, focused on developing democracy within the United States. And this is America's major contribution. Everything else falls and comes from that, and became involved in European-style great power politics, which were already exhausting themselves. What America did, it gave them a further 50, 60 years lease of life. Now, what the United States needs to do is it needs to detach itself from that. And let's look at the BRICS. 2 countries in the BRICS definitely would want to be friends of the United States. One is India. India has no anger or beef with the United States. It absolutely does not see the United States as a threat or a rival to itself. India wants to be a friend of the United States. Now, I was talking about Russia before. I know that this is a view that is unusual for many people in the United States, but I absolutely believe this. And I believe this goes back very far. Again, I can remember in the 1970s how the Russians were proposing at that time that Lockheed build a factory in Voronezh to build TriStars, Lockheed TriStars. So, I mean, there has always been this hankering to have a good relationship with the United States. And yes, Russia has a good relationship with China, but always the instinct is to balance. Don't overcommit to one power, especially one superpower like China. Always maintain a good relationship with the United States, which, like Russia, is connected to European civilization, but is somehow distinct from it. So that immediately gives the Americans and the Russians some degree of connection. Now, what could have happened is that the United States could have engaged with all of that process, and it could have shaped it. And BRICS initially was just a talking shop, basically a club. It didn't have to become an economic bloc. But of course, that is precisely what it is becoming. And the president, by the way, who did more than anything else to make it into an anti-American bloc, was not Donald Trump. It was Joe Biden. because Joe Biden started dividing the world, as I remember, into the democracies on the one hand and the autocracies on the other, and he tried to create a platform where all the democracies, which were arbitrarily selected, so countries like Angola and Saudi Arabia were democracies and not autocracies. Autocracies were divided to it. And the Chinese and the Russians saw all of that, and they started to compare notes, and they say, well, look, this president, this administration, the United States under them is very, very hostile to us, and we need to start forming a proper bloc with ourselves and attracting other members to it. The real big lost opportunity that has happened over the last year is that Trump was elected. He did appear to represent a change. As a human being, as a person, he's actually widely liked. Nobody, no leader in the world outside the West liked Joe Biden. No leader outside the West liked Barack Obama. All of them liked Trump. They found him funny. They found him human. They found they could talk to him. They were somebody they could listen to. Even Xi Jinping gets on with him. So this was his big opportunity. This was what should have happened. They should have moved forward purposefully. Maybe not exactly join the BRICS, but say to all of the various BRICS states, well, look, you've got various ideas for trade. Let's see what we can sort out. Let's see whether we can become involved. The Russians would have jumped at that. They'd have been delighted. They'd have said, come along, open up, LNG projects in the Arctic. The Chinese want to be here, but it's good for us if the Americans are there too. They could have involved themselves in joint aerospace projects with the Russians. Why not? Absolutely. They could have done the same with India in other ways, help develop India's high-tech industries, its pharmaceutical industries, which would have been important for keeping pharmaceutical costs in the United States low. Anyway, all kinds of things would have been done. But unfortunately, you have this miasma of people in Washington who still are attached to this strategy, this European strategy, great power strategy, which is ultimately so un-American, and who have managed somehow to pull Donald Trump back in. And it's a big missed opportunity. And I don't think the door on that has closed. Not at all, by the way. I think that one day, maybe a new administration, a new president, or perhaps even this president, when he sorts things through, because Trump is one of those people who strikes me as he makes every conceivable mistake, gets everything wrong until he finally arrives at the right answer. But maybe eventually this opportunity that is there will be grasped, and America will do that which it did so successfully in the 19th and early 20th century, which is make that break from Europe and forge its own way, making itself, as it did before, the richest country in the world. And there's no reason why it couldn't stay that again. Because, to repeat a point I've often made, in economic competition, the United States has nothing to fear.
Robert, I just noticed something. We got to take a bunch of questions, but we have the bell for the member. Can I get to some of the questions here just to make sure we know?
Yeah, before we wrap. Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, here I'll read 3 over on CommiTube because I can't bring them up. Denmark is in a complete drone panic, so much that an anti-drone SUV from Danish police rammed Zelensky's car convoy when he visited and was towed away, says Red Viking. I hadn't heard that. Pasha Moyer says, Alex, you asked yesterday for a jingle for your drone segment. I can't paste it here, but I added it to Viva Barnes Law. And then we got, can the Duran give us the a cappella version of Rio Hungry? Okay, well, I'm not sure what that is either. Now, but hold on. In our locals community, I noticed a bunch of questions there, and I'm going to bring them up here right now. Okay, so starting off with Pasha Moyer. Alex, okay, you got the jingle. I'm going to give that up afterwards. Andrew Piscadlo says, I'm thrilled to see my three favorite geopolitical analysts, Alexander, Alex, and Robert, minus Rich. Love you do, Dave, as well. I'm furious at the administration for this folly. Every additional Ukrainian and Russian death is on Trump. Robert and perhaps Alexander know how involved I am in both refugees from Ukraine and contacts in Russia. It's unacceptable that I had intel fed to me on the ground from Sumy that Ukrainians were cut off in Kursk, and you refuse to believe your own DNI. The suffering of Ukraine is unimaginable. I got fed that daily from the people. It makes me want to sink Republican candidates. Russians should be seeking absolute victory, particularly with cutting off the Black Sea from the Ukrainians. It's not about punishment. It's about taking away resources from savages who do not desire to govern their own citizens. Andrew has another one here. My eyes are black from looking at this. Every time I need to figure out what's going on, it requires me to look further in the worst parts of humanity. Andrew, Putin, I think, has brought up a new security, arrangement in Europe. What would that look like? Says son of a Mitch 824.
Can you explain? I think Trump gave the impression that he was on board with a new security architecture for Europe. Can you guys describe what that might look like? It looked like Trump was. Putin put out also the START treaty proposal. That's part of that security architecture, though that's on a more global scale. And Trump said nothing about it. Then some of us were like, hold on a second. Some of us were told that was part of the reason for the meeting in Alaska. And then Trump, yesterday or day before, it's like, oh yeah, I think that is a good idea. It's like, that would have been nice to do it a little bit sooner, but okay, better late than never. Can you describe what kind of possibilities for security architecture that Russia is thinking about that we could participate in, other than this NATO permanent conflict one we're currently trapped in?
Well, this goes back to the 90s, and the Russians made many proposals back then. Firstly, they don't want NATO moving further towards their borders. And I think that is the first thing to say. They have never asked for or sought NATO's actual dismantlement. And this is a thing which many people never quite understand. But to repeat again, the Russians would prefer to see a denuclearized Germany within a military alliance led by the United States than a nuclear Germany, which is outside any alliance with any other power, and which might indeed start to think of returning to policies of the kind that the Russians remember very well from the 20th century. So they would want to see some kind of NATO structure, perhaps preserved, but not moving closer to their borders. They would want very, very clear rules about military deployments, things of that kind across Europe. They would not want to see NATO or American bases in Scandinavia or in Eastern Europe, which is what they thought they were promised back in the 1980s, that there would be no movement of technologies of those kind of things, bases into the West. And above all, and this is the key, they want a structure, a security structure, a kind of defense community system above NATO, with Russia itself a full participant, and which would have some sort of role in being able to veto decisions. And this really does mean veto decisions which the Russians felt were dangerous for themselves. And of course, the United States would have a comparable veto right over Russian moves that might conceivably be threatening to the United States or its allies. You remember when we first started, we talked about the new submarine drone that the Russians apparently have now put in service, which is the Poseidon submarine. And I said what an incredibly dangerous and destabilizing weapon that was. Well, that would be one type of system which, using this structure and the means of communication that existed, the Americans might be able to say to the Russians, this is completely unacceptable, you cannot field it, and that there would be discussions taking place through it and limitations placed on its deployment and potentially its abolition. The Russians proposed this kind of arrangement back in the 90s. and it led to the OSCE, which never really functioned. And then in 2008, when Obama was elected, they thought he was going to be the person that they were going to agree all this with, and they proposed it all over again. And of course, they quickly discovered that Obama said yes, and he really meant no. And he tricked and deceived them in negotiations. And that led to massive loss of goodwill, by the way, because the Russians really developed a deep loathing for Obama because they felt that he was dishonest in the way that he'd handled this whole topic. And Putin, apparently in Alaska, floated something like this to Trump again.
And, Alex, can you remind people, coming from a family with long diplomatic history, because I get it, seeing it also in the chat, that there's this popular belief that Trump is clearly fond of, that deception is the way to go, that's what equals leverage, that's what equals power, and how in diplomatic relations, the quickest way to lose all leverage is to be untrustworthy, to be unreliable. If the other side can't trust you, how do you get anything done? Can you explain how in the diplomatic circles, deception is not the preferred path? Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah, exactly as you said. Deception is not. I mean, you don't lie. Don't lie. Don't deceive. It's that simple when you're engaged in diplomacy. I mean, go back to Venezuela. The United States wants the oil, right? You want the oil, okay? Use diplomacy. Maduro's a tough guy to deal with. Granted, he's a tough guy to deal with. I understand all of that stuff. You don't get along with Venezuela. You don't like their government. You don't like Maduro. But you have to deal with him. That's what diplomacy is about. Diplomacy is about dealing with people that you may not like, that you may personally loathe. Putin did not get along with Merkel. Merkel did not get along with Putin. But they engaged with each other. Granted, Putin was burned by Merkel. You see, Merkel deceived Putin, which has led us to where we are with Ukraine in a way. Actually, in a big part, Merkel's deception led us to Ukraine with the Minsk agreements, and that's all coming out now. So even when you lie and you deceive, eventually the truth comes out. So you might as well just play it straight. Play it straight. Look, Maduro, here's the deal. We need the oil, man. We want the oil. We want to do business with you. How can we work this out? It doesn't happen overnight. Diplomacy is also a really long process. It's difficult. It's long. It takes a lot of meetings. It takes a lot of negotiations. You have to give, you have to take. But if you are sincere in your approach and you're straight up with what you're looking for, then you can find compromise. That's the art of diplomacy. That's the art of politics, is the compromise. I just get the sense, throughout this whole live stream, I think one of the common threads to all of this is somewhere along the way, the United States lost the art of diplomacy, the art of negotiations. And that's weird because Trump is the negotiations guy. Right? He is the negotiations guy, but where is it? We're all waiting for the negotiations. Where is it? That's why everyone was so happy with Alaska. Finally, Trump is there. He's ready to negotiate. This is what we've been waiting for. This is what he's best at. And it got all thrown away. Yeah. All the progress that was made for Alaska just got thrown away. Why? Because Kellogg told you that Russia's economy is about to collapse. I mean, we're missing the diplomacy in the United States. We're missing diplomats in the United States because a lot of people that are being placed in embassies or that are in the foreign service, these are political appointees. These aren't people that are coming from the schools of diplomacy, from the Georgetowns, from the schools where they're teaching diplomacy. That should get put in these positions and should be working in the State Departments. A lot of the positions, a lot of the ambassadorships are political appointees. They shouldn't be there. These people haven't learned the art of diplomacy, the art of foreign policy, international relations. But there you have it.
It's the art of shock and awe. I mean, it might have been the wrong lessons learned of prior conflicts. Here, I'll read these over on Rumble. Alex, good. This is Ginger Ninja. He says, I also invest in precious metals, mostly lead and brass. Super Buff Shaft says they're stealing elections all over. Love you guys, but you spent don't you guys. I spent time on the ostriches, and I think it's important. Get Jovan Pulitzer on, and my cleaning lady thinks Alex C looks like Ben Affleck. Okay, gentlemen.
I don't know.
On that note, I'll sort of start with Alexander. Any sort of last thoughts? I mean, we talked about the smart strategy for Trump would be to engage BRICS, not wage war on BRICS, especially as it relates to a rapprochement with Russia, where a New START treaty would substantially reduce the risk of escalatory conflict around the world. Don't send long-range weapons. Don't approve them. Don't brag about them. Try, tell Zelensky and Europe the gig is up. And Zelensky, you can party in your houses in Monaco, and you can party in your houses in Miami and everywhere else that these Ukrainian oligarchs have. But it's time to end the conflict. Don't get further dragged into a Mideastern war, and choose diplomacy, not war, when it comes to Venezuela. But what are some other sort of closing thoughts on where we stand today?
I think the first thing to say, and I think it's a key one, that the United States has everything to play for. There is no reason objectively why the United States should be afraid of engaging diplomacy. It's a country with tremendous strengths, and it's a country that people around the world want to engage with positively. Forget about Europe, which is not only going down, but which has a deeply manipulative relationship to the United States and has done so for a long time. I mean, it's both dependent on the United States and it wants to use it. Other countries, there are countries outside which want to partner with the United States, and they're prepared to do so in a positive way. And tariffs are not an issue, by the way. Everybody understands that the United States wants to reindustrialize. The Chinese understand it. I read the Chinese media. They might not be happy about some of what the tariffs are all about, but they know they've had a very good run for their money where trade with the United States is concerned. They also understand pragmatically, because they're tough-minded and hard-headed people, that the United States has said enough is enough. So by all means, put your tariffs in, do it consistently, do it wisely, explain to others why you are doing it, and pursue above all that policy which Abraham Lincoln once spoke about, a just and sustainable peace between ourselves and all nations. That is the best policy for the United States. And just to finally finish, because I'm somebody who always goes off on historical tangents, you're talking about deception and trickery not being a good process for diplomacy. I remember once upon a time, long ago, reading a handbook on diplomacy written by François de Caillères, who was Louis XIV's primary diplomat. And it's an amazing book, by the way. It talks about how to conduct diplomacy between sovereigns. He said, never lie, because if you lie, you might gain a temporary advantage, but you will leave poison behind you. And that is as true today as it was when it was written all those centuries ago.
Absolutely. Thanks to Alex and Alexander for joining us. You can track on YouTube, Rumble, Rockfin, and of course, their great channel on Locals, where Alexander will be later today doing his live stream. The Duran.locals.com, the Duran Reel on X, and just the Duran on the others, and their individual channels, which they're being effective because YouTube has been trying to dial them down. So you got to like those videos, share those videos, subscribe those videos. As Cartman might say, like, share, subscribe. Because it makes you feel good. But in that same sentiment, and Alexander McCors's channel, Alex Christophero's channel, you can also go to the great shop. Someone was asking me about this wonderful little double eagle U.S. cup. That's from the Duran shop. They got tons of great merch, shirts, hats, you name it, coffee mugs, all of it. But if you want to stay on top of what is happening in the world, because even if you think the world doesn't matter to you, the world ends up finding a way to make clear it matters to you. So follow the Duran every which way you can to help improve our chances of global peace and prosperity going forward.
Gentlemen, have a great afternoon. We'll say our proper goodbyes. We will end the stream now, and I'll be live in 2 hours. Peace out, everyone.
Thank you so much.